Good morning, everyone. I see that people are still joining the webinar, so we're just going to wait a few minutes so that everyone can join, and then we'll get started. They're still joining. All right, we seem to have leveled off. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and thank you all for joining. I'm Padia Mixon. I am the CEO of New American Pathways, and I have Whitney Queskin here as well. She is our immigration program manager. And we just want to welcome you. We decided to have this webinar because we've been getting a lot of questions over the last couple of months about welcoming Ukrainian refugees to Atlanta, and lots of people with questions about how people come, what services are available, lots of interest in being a part of welcoming Ukrainians to Atlanta. And we have been requesting information from our national partner, Church World Service, and we've gotten some information, and so we want to share it with you. Before we get started, I do want to say that a lot of the programs that have been set up for Ukrainians are quite different than other programs for other groups in the past. And so we're learning with you, and information is subject to change. So as we get new information, we will definitely be updating all of our partners and folks that have joined this call today. So I'm going to get started just giving some general numbers of where we are and what's happening with Ukrainian refugees. And so if we could just go on to the next slide, can share some information. So just a little bit Ukraine by the numbers. So UNHCR data, that's where I got this information from, shows that about 4.9 million Ukrainian refugees have registered in countries across Europe, and about 3.2 million have registered for temporary protected status or other types of schemes in European countries. And so in the United States side, the Biden administration has committed to welcoming 100,000 Ukrainians. And for the next couple of years, most of those Ukrainians will not be coming through the US refugee program, but will be coming through other programs that we're going to talk about in a minute. So the main program we're looking at right now is a program called Uniting for Ukraine. And through that program, almost 46,000 applications for sponsorship for Ukrainians have been submitted, and 26,927 have already been approved. There have already been close to 7,000 Ukrainian arrivals in the United States. Looking at those numbers, we're getting that update on a weekly basis from our partner, Church World Service, and these numbers are good through June 3rd. What we are also seeing is that right now, Atlanta is not one of the top sites for Ukrainians. So we're not on the list of those top sites, although we have already had some folks who've come through this program and have come in other ways that have come to our office for services. And I will go ahead and move on to the next slide and turn it over to Whitney, because we're going to talk a little bit about the different statuses that Ukrainians can have, and kind of what their benefits are and how that works and what programs exist. And so turning it over to you, Whitney.
Yeah. So I'm going to run through the 5 bullet points that are on this slide and then add one at the bottom. TPS is temporary protected status that exists for countries. It exists to protect and allow people to work who are already in the United States and a disaster of some sort occurs in their home country. So there are about 10 countries right now that have TPS available to the citizens of those countries who live in the United States. For Ukraine, they had to have entered the United States on or before April 11 of 2022. So anybody who's coming after that date currently will not be eligible for TPS. Homeland Security does sometimes move the dates and extend the period of eligibility for TPS, and that may happen in the future. There is a fee to apply. It's $545, generally for adults, it depends on your age, $50 for children, and that includes a work permit. We don't know how long it will take. Generally for the first round of TPS for any country, it is a while. We're looking at, in the past, it was 5 to 8 months. Ukraine is the first new country we've seen in quite a while. And USCIS processing time is very slow on all fronts right now. We have filed about 60 of these so far. We're seeing a lot of people who don't meet the eligibility requirements because of the date they entered. The good thing is you get an alien number, which is the 9-digit number that identifies people who are immigrating or in the United States with certain statuses. And with that, you can apply for public benefits, which have recently been opened to Ukrainians. TPS, once granted, will be good, a valid non-immigrant status from the date it's granted until October 19, 2023, which for a lot of people who did not enter under the Uniting for Ukraine program extends their legal status for about 6 extra months. So, and it's generally renewable. TPS hasn't been successfully canceled for any country in the last decade. So there's litigation for several countries, but none of that has gone through. Parole, there are many kinds of parole. People who are entering through the southern United States border, through the Mexican border with the US, are being granted humanitarian parole for 1 year. They may have started granting 2 years recently, but we have only seen 1 year of parole. Parole is a very temporary status, discretionary. The government can refuse to renew it. They can refuse to issue work permits. It's up to them how they decide to process it. Parole is basically to give people a safe place to live, to stay in the United States with this temporary status until they decide to go home. In the past, we've used humanitarian parole for a lot of things like getting people in to donate organs or children who were left off a petition. So like you have to either have a way to get legal status in the United States once you're here with the parole, or you have to have plans to return to your home country. We are applying for work permits for people who have parole. We have absolutely no idea how long those will take. The closest thing to that are Cubans who are paroled out of detention, and those are taking more than a year. And so you never see the work permit by the time the parole expires. So refugee status. Most of the Ukrainian refugees we are seeing at New American Pathways have come through the Lautenberg program, which is the next bullet point, and I'll explain that program. And really just a note here, according to the goals of international refugee resettlement, firm resettlement in your second country, so let's say you've fled Ukraine and you're living in Belgium, firm resettlement in Belgium is a higher priority than third country resettlement, which would be you being resettled in the United States. So we may begin to see more people entering with refugee status in the coming years, but right now, the only mechanism for entering the US with refugee status is really the Lautenberg program. The Lautenberg program, which many of you may be familiar with, it's been around for quite a while. It was established by Senator Frank Lautenberg in 1990 to quickly resettle religious minorities from the former USSR and Southeast Asia, and it was expanded to include religious minorities from Iran in 2004. According to the 2017 numbers, evangelical Christians made up more than 90% of the caseload, and most of those were from Ukraine. To be eligible for the program, you have to have a family member in the United States willing to sponsor you, and it can only be certain relationships also. There's a list, and we will gladly go through that with anybody who has that specific question. And they have to be an active member of the previously persecuted religious minority. There is a list of churches or denominations especially for Ukraine, there's a list of denominations that qualify. You have to be able to prove that you have been a member of that church. Currently, the sponsoring family member cannot apply for someone who's already in the United States under this program. If they're still in Europe, before you had to have been in Ukraine or in the former Soviet Union. They've expanded it to you can be anywhere in Europe, including Ukraine, but they have not expanded it to people who are already in the United States. So if someone has already come here with parole, we can't do Lautenberg at that point. People who go through the Lautenberg system enter as refugees or as parolees, but once you have been here a year with either of those statuses, you qualify for adjustment, so you can apply for a green card. Okay, Uniting for Ukraine is the new program that Padia is going to talk about extensively. I'm just going to give you a brief overview that you have to, as a Ukrainian citizen, you have to be sponsored by someone in the United States. And there is a financial form that's required. It's called the I-134. And it's not a legally binding document, and it can be filled out by an organization or a company or an individual. It differs from the regular affidavits of support that we do for other sorts of visas. The people who are approved for this program are issued an alien number, so that 9-digit number for people immigrating to the United States. They enter with a parole document that's good for 2 years. But because of the dates when this program was instituted, people who come under Uniting for Ukraine are not going to qualify for things like TPS, temporary protected status. And then the last item I just want to touch on is asylum. So to qualify for asylum in the United States, you have to be here, and you have to be able to prove individual persecution based on race, religion, national origin, membership in a social group, or political opinion. While the Ukrainian government continues to control Ukraine, it would be very difficult to be granted asylum as a Ukrainian just based on the war. If circumstances of control of the country change, that may be a grounds for asylum for people who are here. But the filing deadlines are negotiable if there's something like a change in country conditions. If there are people who are experiencing persecution under the Ukrainian government prior to the Russian invasion, that's a different story, and we would be glad to sit down and talk to somebody if that is their situation. And back to you, Padia.
Okay, thank you, Whitney. I know that can be confusing, all the different statuses, but the big point that I want to make, which makes this very different than resettlement of refugees that we've done in the past, is that most Ukrainians coming to the US in 2022 and 2023 will not have refugee status and will not be eligible for resettlement benefits. So, we've had a lot of people who are interested in being a family friend through New American Pathways with Ukrainian refugees. And we want to say that at this time, that is not going to be very likely because most Ukrainians will not be coming in as refugees and will not be resettled through the resettlement program. That doesn't mean there's nothing that New AP can do, but it means that we're not going to be serving this community in the traditional way that those of you who've been working with us for years are accustomed to. And so I really want to highlight, and we'll go to the next slide, the Uniting for Ukraine program, because it's a very different program. It's a private sponsorship program. And private sponsorship is not something you hear about a lot these days. It's kind of something that used to be a lot more common. It's something that the State Department wants to see more of. And they're kind of basing it on a Canadian model. Years ago, when we had the Syrian refugee crisis, there was a lot of news stories about Canada and private sponsorship. This is something that the US government is interested in, and this is how they're approaching welcoming Ukrainians to the United States. So in the Uniting for Ukraine program, family members and community groups can sponsor Ukrainian parolees. And so if you're granted, like Whitney said, you're granted a kind of humanitarian parole through the Uniting for Ukraine program. Sponsors do carry the financial responsibility for those that they sponsor, and they're not eligible to receive resettlement funding for initial housing and other costs. So when a refugee comes, the resettlement agency, secures an apartment, pays rent and utilities, provides furniture and all necessary items. That part of resettlement will not be the case for this group. We are not funded to do that. And instead, the private sponsor takes on that financial responsibility. And then the sponsors are asked to provide the core services that resettlement agencies would typically provide. Things like registering children for school or taking people to the health department. Those kinds of, teaching people how to use MARTA or getting a Georgia ID, or those kinds of specific services that resettlement agencies typically provide. Sponsors would be in the position of helping families access those things. Additionally, this group would not be able to work until they receive a work authorization document. And these documents, as Whitney said, could take time. So people who are interested in this program should just be aware that resettlement model where somebody comes and the refugee resettlement agency takes on the bulk of services at the very beginning, and someone can go to work very quickly. That model is not in place for this population. So I think almost the entire 100,000 Ukrainian individuals that the Biden administration committed to welcome will be welcomed through this program, through Uniting for Ukraine. There is a web link here for Uniting for Ukraine on the welcome.us page, or welcome us, but welcome.us. And I feel like this is the most comprehensive set of information I have seen. I'm just gonna click on it to see. Well, actually I have to ask Annika to click on it to see, but it contains information about who qualifies, what the process is, what those core services I talked about look like, all of those items. So it's a really good website if you're interested at all in this program. And I have gotten a lot of questions. It's not really popping up, but this is something, that we should email out afterwards. If you're interested, I would go ahead and copy down the website because it's a very good resource. One of the questions I'm getting a lot is, can you help us match with a Ukrainian? We don't know a Ukrainian person, but we'd like to be a sponsor. We also do not have connections with Ukrainians who are in Europe and are looking for sponsors. This is a question we put forth to our partner, Church World Service. Right now, most of the cases that we're assisting with applications for are family or people that already know someone and have identified someone in Ukraine that they want to sponsor. Here's the United for Ukraine program. And there's just lots of great resources on here. If you can see, I'm gonna scroll down. What is it? What does humanitarian parole mean? How do you apply to be a sponsor? What are the forms? There is a question on here about being matched. Unfortunately, when you link on it, it says contact a local organization. And I know that some of you think of New AP right away, and I would too, but unfortunately, we don't know how to do that. So then there's information that you can submit to welcome.us as well if you want more information. So that is a great resource. And if we can go back to the presentation. And move on to the next slide. So what can New AP do? How can New AP be involved in supporting Ukrainians who've come to Atlanta, and also supporting sponsors who have welcomed Ukrainians into Atlanta? So just a few weeks ago, Congress passed a big spending package for Ukraine, and part of that package was legislation that stated that Ukrainian parolees had access to Office of Refugee Resettlement benefits. And we are an organization that can help people access those benefits. So we can provide information and referral services, including benefit applications. So that means, while somebody's waiting to find a job, they need food stamps, they need medical care, they need access to refugee cash assistance. We can help people apply for those benefits. We can also provide social adjustment case management services. Those are things beyond just information and referral, but short-term case management issues to help people navigate a process in their new community. We can provide employment services and immigration services that's helping people fill out applications, understand their status, all apply through programs for family reunification, or even through the United for Ukraine program. Also, a person who comes in with humanitarian parole would have access to New AP's longer term services like career advancement, education and youth, family empowerment, and civic engagement. All of these programs have some limitations that may be based on geography. So if someone lived in South Georgia, it may be hard to access some of these services, but according to their immigration status, they would be eligible. And the other thing is, we're asking that if people are sponsoring someone through Uniting for Ukraine program, and they want to work with New AP for additional services, we're asking them to register with our national partner, Church World Service, on their Ukraine website. The reason is because ordinarily for hiring and interpretation, we understand demand as we see people come through the refugee program. But since people can privately sponsor through Uniting for Ukraine, we have a really hard time measuring how much demand there is in the Atlanta community. And so when to start trying to hire, when to bring on which interpreters, these are things that, we don't know. And also our national partner, who can often provide us with some funding, also doesn't know. So we would ask you to both reach out to CWS and to reach out to us if you want to work with us and you are a sponsor through this program. And we'll move on to the next slide. We're currently, we've had 12 Ukrainians arrive through the Lautenberg program this year. So this is certainly a small number of the refugees that we've resettled, but we've started to see lots of folks come in to our immigration department, and this will be the point of entry for a lot of our Ukrainian clients. And so we're starting to recruit, increase our capacity in interpretation and contract services right now. Ukrainian, Romanian, and Russian are the languages of the population. Our staff capacity is currently quite limited, and so we're monitoring demand. As demand increases, we may recruit staff. What we want to say to the community is your patience is appreciated, because we don't know exactly what the demand will be in Atlanta, and Atlanta is not one of those communities that has been identified as is one of the main places where Ukrainians will come. And I just have one more slide, and then we're going to open it up to questions for me or for Whitney. So if we have Ukrainians that just need services, our immigration walk-in days are every Tuesday from 9 to 12. And we have seen that a lot of our Ukrainian clients who are coming in for benefits applications are coming from very far away, and there's some documents they need. So we don't want any wasted trips. So we have opened up a Gmail account, and we can, so we ask that people contact us through this account, and we can set up an appointment to make sure that you come in with everything you need for information and referral employment services, resettlement, not in the sense of those resettlement benefits, but just assistance on that process of being in a new country. So we're asking people to send an email through this Gmail account and have an appointment set up, so they make sure that they bring all of the correct documents. Because what we're seeing right now is many Ukrainians who are coming in are driving from quite far away. And that is the information that we have available to us right now. I'm going to open it up to questions. One question we've already got is, can you get a copy of this presentation? And the answer to that question is yes. I've already had one individual give me an email address to send that to, and we will certainly forward this on and make this available. Are there any other questions? And please type questions through the Q&A.
Are doing that, Katie, I had a clarification to make. The I-134 sponsorship forms have to be signed by an individual. So basically, I can put the wording from the USCIS website into the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, we can send that out. But basically, an individual has to sign the form, but they can be just the front man for a faith-based organization or a civic organization or a group of people. That's different from a lot of other applications that require this form. And then my second addition here is, because people are coming from so far away, the immigration department does also have a virtual walk-in option, and we can send that link out as well.
Okay, we have a question. What is the cost for sponsorship for Uniting for Ukraine? And Whitney, do you have more of a requirement? Because the situation here is, when someone sponsors someone coming in, they're basically responsible for making sure that this person has a means to survive until they can be self-supporting. So it's not the same as co-sponsoring through New AP, where there's a fee. It's more of a cost of what it would cost to support a person or a family. But if there's specific requirements, Whitney, you could elaborate a little bit more on those.
Sure. So generally for sponsorship of an individual, by an individual, the USCIS looks at the HHS poverty guidelines, and the number of people on the individual in the United States taxes, plus the number of people who are trying to come under the program. There is a household size, and then there's a income requirement, and they're going to look at the 2021 tax return, adjusted gross income, to figure out if you have enough financial stability to sponsor the number of people you're trying to bring. For instance, if you're a single person, bringing a single person, you have to have made at least $22,887 in the previous year or currently, and be able to prove that. You also have to be eligible to work legally in the United States and have lawful status here as well, but that includes a lot of temporary statuses, as long as you are eligible to work under that status.
So that's what's required. But if you sponsor someone, the key here is to have a good plan in place for how this person will live, where they will live, how they will eat, how they will meet their basic needs, until such time as they can be financially independent. And so when you're sponsoring, you're taking on that role. And that's why a lot of the sponsors are family, or there is a family member who has a faith partner or community group who is working with them. Because it is different than resettlement. It is not as finite, and setting those boundaries and making those commitments is kind of up to you and the person that you're sponsoring.
There is no fee to do the application. That's the last part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we have some more questions. Okay, if you know, are Ukrainians coming without fathers and male family members because men are not supposed to leave Ukraine while the war is going on? Is there help available for the impact of coming without a dad? We do anticipate that we will see a lot more, single parent households or women and children cases coming out of Ukraine because of this very reason. So we do anticipate that would be an issue. Some of the costs generally incurred in those kinds of cases is childcare can be a big issue. If someone comes and they have a child under 1, employment may be a challenge. So thinking about how long it might take someone to get a job if they have small children. Those are some of the additional services that we typically provide single parent households. And if they have if they have multiple children under school age, we generally feel like it's going to be very difficult for them to achieve self-sufficiency without some kind of support. And those are things to really think about with single parent households. We do believe that the average family size in Ukraine is relatively small, but we do anticipate women and children cases coming. And it says, you may have said this already, but do we have a sense of how many sponsors have applied and been approved to this program? Yes, we do. There have been a little over 45,000 applications submitted through this program so far, and about between 26 and 27,000 have already been approved. So it looks like they're approving these pretty quickly. Our national partner, CWS, said they're estimating potentially 75,000 approved in 2022, an additional 25,000 in 2023, or at least that is the goal. And so someone has indicated that their Russian language skills are strong at an intermediate level, and interpreting on demand can be much more challenging, but will my skill be helpful? Yes. And so I feel like if you have language skills and you want to consider volunteering, if you could, that is definitely something that we would be interested in. And the advancement department is typing in to help give you a link of where to go. Another one is, if Atlanta is not expected to welcome a lot of Ukrainians, what U.S. communities or regions are prioritized to welcome them? I actually have a chart of places. I did see that New York was a really prominent place. Miami was one of the major cities. I saw near the DC area was big. I think in Pennsylvania, there was a big community. So right now what we're seeing is, there's about 8 or 9 places that we've seen a lot of applications coming through. And there are places where there are large existing Ukrainian communities. So we've seen a couple of different folks talking about interpreting, so that information from advancement would be helpful. And then somebody's requesting a copy of the presentation.
Skipped Cindy Zeldin's question. If they came here into this program, do they have to get temporary protective status in order to work? No. There are work permits based on parole that they are eligible for when they enter. We have seen 0 completely undocumented Ukrainians. That's not happening, at least not in Atlanta or with us. So people who enter through the southern US border or people who enter through Uniting for Ukraine enter with parole, and they can apply, pay for and apply for a work permit based on that parole.
And Nancy's provided a link in the chat for people who have special skills and want to volunteer their time. There is a link there for you. And in terms of permanent status, that is something that we don't know yet. So right now it's a 2-year parole, but we don't know what will happen next. And that is kind of, something that we also went through with the Afghan program. Is up front, we didn't really know what were the long-term status eligibility for folks until months after they were already arriving. So I think that the optimistic picture here is that there would be an opportunity to safely return to Ukraine, but that remains to be seen. But I think on the Uniting for Ukraine site, they talked about why parole instead of refugee status, and they talked about the slow process for applying for refugee status, how long that takes, and the kind of lack of flexibility and that kind of hope that people would be able to return. Do we have any other questions or comments? So we have recorded this session today, and as I said, Nancy and her team will make that available to you. Nancy Gaddy is our Chief Advancement Officer. We can also make this presentation available to you, and some of you have asked for it specifically and given me your email address, and so I've copied that down. But we will continue to share information as we get it. And I got one more request for the presentation. But we will continue to share information as we get it, and as things change. And we are in the same boat in some sense, because like any new program, we kind of initially learn with our partners and with our clients. So we'll be learning about this program together. As we have updates, we'll keep you updated. And if there's a reason to have another webinar down the road, we will do that, as we did with the Afghanistan program earlier in the year. If there are no more questions or comments, I just want to thank all of you for being partners of New AP, for participating in this panel, and for your interest in welcoming folks to Atlanta. So thank you so much.